The Expectation Effect by David Robson. Chapter 8. Limitless Willpower. How to build endless reserves of self-control and mental focus. If you were watching closely during Barack Obama's presidency, you might have noticed that he wore the same style of blue or gray suit for almost all public occasions. This was not a fashion statement, but a life hack. He thought that he could save his mental reserves for the responsibilities of the presidency if he avoided having to make small but irrelevant decisions that would sap his concentration. Michelle would apparently roll her eyes at his behavior. "My wife makes fun of how routinized I've become," he said. But Obama is not alone in this energy-saving scheme. Arianna Huffington, Steve Jobs, Richard Branson, and Mark Zuckerberg are all said to have simplified their wardrobe as a way of preserving their brains for loftier tasks. "I'd feel I'm not doing my job if I spent any of my energy on things that are silly or frivolous about my life," Zuckerberg told one interviewer. Their reasoning was apparently based on solid scientific research, which Obama cited in a Vanity Fair interview. For decades, researchers have assumed that any kind of mental effort, such as making decisions, avoiding distraction, or resisting temptation, draws on the brain's stores of glucose. When we wake up in the morning, we have that vital fuel in abundance, but it dwindles every time we exercise our mind, leading to lapse in concentration and self-control as the day progresses. As one expert told the Financial Times, "There is only so much quality thinking your brain can do each day." According to this theory, the limits of our mental reserve could explain procrastination at work. Every moment that we exercise self-control by concentrating on the task at hand, it saps a little of our energy until we eventually can't resist the urge to take a look at Facebook, Twitter, or YouTube. So we waste hours in the mid-afternoon lull as the clock counts down to the end of the day. Importantly, the same mental reserves are believed to power many different tasks, meaning that effort in one area can supposedly lead to lapse in another. This is said to be the reason why some people feast on junk food following a hard day in the office. After a long time concentrating, we lose the strength required to resist the temptation of the cookie jar. Late-night splurges on Amazon and eBay could similarly be blamed on a fatigued brain. When our mental reserves are already down, we can't resist spending our money on useless goods we later regret. Some authors have even claimed that our limited mental reserves could explain why high-powered people cheat on their spouses. With a relentless work schedule sapping his decision-making energy, someone like Bill Clinton would have been almost helpless to control himself, according to this theory. Does it have to be this way? The idea that our mental resources are limited and can become exhausted over time certainly chimes with many of our experiences at home and at work. We don't have to have a degree in psychology, after all, to describe someone as having a short fuse, to think of our patience wearing thin, or to argue that you can't burn the candle at both ends. And that is precisely the problem with so much of this research. Like studies on stress, it failed to question whether we simply place these limits on ourselves through an extremely prevalent expectation effect. The truth is that most of us are only tapping a small part of our potential, while a huge reservoir is just waiting to be released. Intriguingly, some cultures already have the widespread view that mental focus and self-control increase with effort, and this is reflected in people's behavior. What we once assumed to be a biological limit is really a cultural artifact, and by learning to change our expectations, we can make better use of the brain's enormous reserves. This understanding can even help us to recognize the true power of superstition and prayer for believers and atheists alike. The depleted ego. The prevailing theories of mental focus and self-control, which are often lumped together under the term willpower, can be traced to the father of psychoanalysis, Sigmund Freud. He saw our psyche as having three components: the id, the ego, and the superego. The id was unruly and impulsive, while the superego was chaste and censorious, dictating the most moral or socially appropriate course of action. The pragmatic ego stood between these two warring entities, reining in the id on the instructions of the superego. But it needed energy to decide what was best for us and to take the correct course of action. Otherwise, our baser impulses would get the upper hand. It was only in the late 1990s that psychologists came to test Freud's theory systematically, with Roy Baumeister leading the way. In his first experiment, the psychologist recruited students under the guise of a taste perception test. Arriving in the lab, the students found two bowls on the table, one full of radishes and one full of cookies. As the experimenter left the room, the luckier participants were told to feast on 2 or 3 cookies. The unluckier ones were told to taste the radishes without taking a cookie. Unbeknown to the participants, the researchers were hidden behind a two-way mirror to make sure they didn't cheat. After they had finished the tasting, the participants were given a complex geometric task, so complex in fact that it was actually impossible to solve. If the participants wanted to stop, they were told that they could ring a bell and the scientists would come and collect them. Otherwise, they were given 30 minutes to wrestle with the problem. Baumeister predicted that the effort of tamping down the temptation to eat the cookies would exhaust the participants' reserves of mental energy, so that the radish eaters would have less resilience on the problem-solving task. And that was exactly what he found. On average, the people in the radish group lasted around 8.5 minutes at the task before they gave up and rang the bell, compared to 19 minutes for the participants who had been free to eat the cookies. A huge difference in mental stamina. Based on these findings, Baumeister saw our willpower as a mental muscle that tires with time. As in homage to Freud's theories, he described the mental exhaustion that comes from exercising self-control and focus as ego depletion, and further research soon offered hundreds more examples to support the theory. When subjects were asked to watch a Robin Williams clip without laughing or smiling, for instance, they were less able to focus on solving a series of anagrams. Or participants had to ignore annoying messages popping up on screen while listening to an interview, and they became more distractible on tests of logic and reading comprehension as a result of their depleted mental resources. In one of the studies that apparently inspired Obama to pare down his own decision-making, students were asked to pick courses for their degree, a choice with serious potential ramifications for their academic success. Because of the mental depletion that came from focusing on this decision, they were subsequently more likely to procrastinate rather than study for a potentially important maths test. Studies on consumer behavior, meanwhile, showed that depleted participants who had been forced to remain focused and engaged while reading aloud the boring biographies of scientists were subsequently more likely to make impulse purchases. In each case, practicing self-discipline and mental focus in one domain, whether resisting temptation, avoiding distraction, solving a difficult problem, planning for the future, or exercising emotional restraint, led to worse performance in another. The evidence appeared to be concrete. We can only control our mind and behavior for so long before we begin to tire. These experiments were particularly striking because the depleting exercises were not especially taxing in the grand scheme of things, suggesting that many of the small trials that we face every day might have similar effects. When you hold your tongue, resist an urge to smoke, drink, or eat. Restrain aggression. Postpone using the toilet. Feign mirth at an inane joke. Push yourself to keep working. It depletes some crucial energy and leaves you with less available for meeting the next challenge. Baumeister wrote in the Psychologist magazine in 2012, indeed, when Baumeister gave participants a phone app prompting them to record their thoughts at random intervals throughout the day, he found that the average person spends about a quarter of their day resisting desires from sex to time on social media. With so many demands draining our resources, it's not surprising that so many of us find it hard to maintain our willpower from time to time. Brain scans were even able to identify a pair of regions, the prefrontal and anterior cingulate cortices, that appeared to be involved in all these different forms of ego control. But to cement their theory, the researchers really needed to be able to identify the fuel that became depleted over time. They settled on the molecule glucose, which also powers our muscles, as the prime candidate. Exercising our focus and willpower can, after all, feel akin to a physical ordeal. The novelist Edward St. Aubyn apparently has to be wrapped in a towel as he writes, since he sweats so profusely while creating his novels, as if the intense concentration were taxing his whole body. And the research shows that the effort of self-control can indeed spill over into the body, leading to an increase in precipitation. In support of the glucose theory, Baumeister points to studies using position emission tomography, PET, that can measure energy consumption in the brain, and which show an increase in glucose metabolism in the frontal regions of the brain as we engage in effortful tasks. Baumeister's own experiments also found an apparent correlation between people's glucose levels and the effects of ego depletion. The lower their blood sugar, the lower their willpower. Even more compellingly, his team found that delivering a quick sugar rush through a glass of lemonade restored participants' mental focus and self-control when they were feeling depleted. The apparently rapid exhaustion of our brain's resources, often after just 5 minutes of mental activity, may sound like bad news. But Baumeister's research nevertheless offered lots of practical suggestions to make the most of our limited reserves. He found that self-control and mental focus can become stronger with practice, like a muscle, and as we saw with the effects of ego depletion itself, the benefits could spill over into multiple domains. Participants in one of the first experiments were encouraged to correct their bad posture over a 2-week period, and they subsequently showed greater perseverance on a laboratory test. People who committed to avoiding snacks, meanwhile, were subsequently twice as likely to give up smoking, while those who attempted to curb swearing in their everyday speech were better able to stay patient with their romantic partners. Somehow, the brain was learning how to expand its reserves and cope with depletion. Baumeister argued that the surest way to boost overall self-control is to change your environment, avoiding small, everyday ordeals that slowly sap your energy, so you can spend it on the things that really matter. If sweets are your particular vice, you might avoid having them in your home or on your desk at work, so that you aren't exhausted by the continual temptation to open the cookie jar. Or if you are easily distracted by your phone during work, you might put it away in your locker. And if you are the president of the U.S., you might simplify your wardrobe and diet to eliminate unnecessary choices and preserve your decision-making energy for matters of national importance. It all seems so certain, yet some recent studies have questioned whether ego depletion is really as inevitable as we once thought. Baumeister's theory, it seems, was missing something essential: the power of belief to control the brain's resources. The mind's the limit. Experience in any profession tells us that some people find the same mental effort much more tiring than others. Just think of the people you know. While some are exhausted at the end of the working day, others seem to have boundless reserves that allow them to read hundreds of novels, play in an orchestra, or write a screenplay. These individual differences may partly depend on our beliefs about the tasks themselves. You might have been brought up to think that reading is hard work, whereas playing music is a form of relaxation, or vice versa, and those beliefs will determine how tiring you find the respective activities. That's worth bearing in mind that you're a parent, teacher, or manager giving instructions to other people. Dutch researchers have shown that simply being told that we may find an exercise to be energizing rather than fatiguing can reduce the sense of depletion so that participants are more persistent and focused. So don't overemphasize the difficulty of a task before someone has tried it for themselves. Even more powerful, however, are our expectations about our own capabilities and our reactions to hard mental work in general. According to some game-changing work by Veronika Job at the University of Vienna in Austria, she has shown that our beliefs about the brain's resources, whether we see them as a finite or non-limited, can powerfully change our experience of ego depletion and our capacity to remain self-controlled and focused under pressure. Working with researchers at Stanford University in the late 2000s, Job first created a questionnaire to test her participants' implicit theories of concentration and self-control with a series of statements that they had to score on a scale of 1, strongly agree, to 6, strongly disagree. They included, when situations accumulate that challenge with you with temptations, it gets more and more difficult to resist the temptations. Strenuous mental activity exhausts your resources, which you need to refuel afterwards. Through taking breaks, doing nothing, watching television, eating snacks. When you have completed a strenuous mental activity, you cannot start another activity immediately with the same concentration because you have to recover your mental energy again. When you have been working on a strenuous mental task, you feel energized and you are able to immediately start with another demanding activity. If you have just resisted a strong temptation, you feel strengthened and you can withstand any new temptations. Your mental stamina fuels itself. Even after strenuous mental exertion, you can continue doing more of it. The people who agreed more with the first set of statements were considered to have a limited theory of the mind's resources, while those who agreed with the second were said to have a non-limited theory of the mind's resources. In the actual experiment, the statements appeared in a single combined list alongside other decoy statements that were added to avoid arousing the participants' suspicion about the study's purpose. After reading the statements, the participants were given an arduous exercise in which they had to cross out certain letters in every word on a typewritten page, a boring but vitally task that was deliberately designed to deplete their resources. Finally, they took the Stroop test, a standard test of concentration in which different color words appear in differently colored text. The participant's task is to report the color of the letters, irrespective of the word that it is presented. You might see the word red appearing in blue, black appearing in orange, or yellow appearing in yellow. The correct answers would be blue, orange, and yellow. If all this sounds slightly tiresome, you can imagine how some of the participants felt. All the people with a limited mindset reacted to the tasks in exactly the way you would predict from ego depletion theory. The fiddly proofreading task exhausted their minds, causing them to lose concentration on the Stroop test. As a result, their accuracy was much worse than a control group who had taken the Stroop test without having to complete the text correction. The people with a non-limited view of the mind, in contrast, showed no signs of fatigue after the first exercise. They actually performed just as well as the control group, who had taken the Stroop test and went fresh without the dull but tiring proofreading task. Astonishingly, Jobs' results seem to show that the consequences of ego depletion are real, but only if you believe in it. Job next recruited a new set of participants to see if she could determine their beliefs, whether that would alter their performance. Instead of seeing the full questionnaire, half the subjects were shown the limited statements given above, while the rest were given the non-limited statements, a subtle intervention that was meant to prime one or the other mindset. The participants were then given the text correction task and the Stroop test, and the effects were huge. Those who had been exposed to the idea that concentration can build with effort were around twice as accurate on the Stroop test compared to the people who had been primed to think that their resources would deplete. This proved casualty through nothing more than a nudge towards one belief or another. She had strengthened or weakened their willpower. Indeed, the people who had been primed with the non-limited views actually performed better if they had taken the so-called depleting task than if they hadn't exerted themselves before the Stroop test. Their beliefs that mental effort could be energized had become a reality. When I spoke to Job about this work, she told me that when she first presented her idea at a colloquium in her native Switzerland, other researchers were skeptical of the possibility that expectations could have these effects. But these game-changing findings have since been replicated many times, with evidence of significant long-term effects. Using participants' diaries of their day-to-day activities, for example, Job found that people with the non-limited view of their mind's resources were better able to recover after a long and tiring day, with higher expectations about what they were going to achieve the following morning, and achieved greater productivity as a result. Amazingly, she found that people with the non-limited view of the mind were actually more productive than their own average after a particularly demanding day compared to a less demanding day. Far from exhausting them, the extra difficulties had boosted their stamina and galvanized their motivation to meet their goals. The effects of these mindsets are especially silent during the most stressful times, such as the run-up to exams. Those with the limited mindset report greater fatigue throughout the period, which leads to greater procrastination, and students' grades and emotional well-being suffer as a consequence. Because of their depleted self-control, they are also more likely to feast on junk food and resort to impulsive spending to lift their mood, the classic signs of ego depletion. With the non-limited view, in contrast, find it much easier to maintain their studies and achieve good grades without procrastinating or neglecting their health. Our beliefs about willpower can even determine our responses to chronic illness. Job has studied a cohort of people with diabetes, revealing that their mindsets influence how likely they were to follow doctors' orders. Overall, people with the non-limited view of their willpower were more diligent in acts of self-care, such as keeping a record of their blood sugar levels, taking their medication, keeping their weight under control. If you feel mentally exhausted at the end of the day, you may be less inclined to take care of yourself. But people with the non-limited view of the mind did not fall into this trap and were healthier as a consequence. The limited view of willpower may be far more common in the West, but this attitude is not universal. Working with Krishna Savani at Nanyang Technological University in Singapore, Job has shown that the non-limited view of the human mind is much more common among Indian students than people in the US or Switzerland, and their mental stamina is much greater as a result. Job and Savani argued that the greater prevalence of the non-limited belief in India may rise from various religious traditions, including Buddhism, Hinduism, and Jainism. Adherents practice mentally taxing activities that are explicitly designed to boost concentration and self-control. They point to the yogic practice of Trataka, which involves concentrating your vision on a single point, such as a black dot or the tip of a candle flame, while ignoring all other distractions. Trataka is essentially the kind of attention task that would have been used by Western scientists to deplete our resources. For practitioners of yoga, however, it is seen as a way of cleansing the mind, preparing it for further concentration, and regular repetition of the exercise appears to cement the idea that focused mental effort can be energizing rather than fatiguing, leading to greater concentration and self-control in many areas of life. It is interesting to contemplate how different the scientific understanding of willpower could have been if the first experiments on mental fatigue had been conducted in a non-Western culture. A unified theory of willpower. These findings may seem to ring the death knell for ego depletion theory. There is, however, a way of reconciling Baumeister's and Jobs' theories if you think about the way the brain is managing its energy levels. According to one view, the prediction machine is acting like an accountant, parceling out our resources so that we don't run our supplies of glucose and whatever other sources of mental fuel dangerously low. As we saw in chapters 5 and 6, the body's sensors cannot judge our energy intake or expenditure very accurately. This means our inner accounting can be swayed by our expectations, including our beliefs about willpower. If you see your resources as limited, it makes sense for your brain to operate stingily, reducing its consumption of glucose after an effortful activity. That way, it will eke out its remaining energy reserves and avoid exhausting them before you have a chance to replenish them. In such cases, the sense of depletion isn't just imagined. The brain really is reducing its energy usage, a psychological consequence of your expectations. In just the same way, we might all tighten our belts and reduce our spending as we await the next paycheck. If you think that you have unlimited resources, however, the internal accountant is much less of a miser, and it releases whatever supplies you need, since it no longer fears running out. Your brain uses as much fuel as it needs in the belief that more will be available, meaning that you can maintain a consistent effort while studying, resisting temptation, or making tough decisions. It simply has no need to cut its energy expenditure and reduce its performance. If true, this might explain why willpower grows with practice. The exercises that Baumeister and others had set their participants helped them to prove to themselves that their mental resources were less easily depleted than they once thought, allowing their brains to release the necessary fuel to maintain their focus and self-control in many other situations. This new unified theory could solve many other mysteries about self-control and concentration that previously puzzled scientists. There had been signs, for instance, that people's mental focus increases if they are led to believe they are near the end of a task, but not if they feel they still have a long way to go. A finding that is hardly compatible with the original iteration of ego depletion theory, but which makes sense when you consider the brain's need to allocate resources. This theory might also explain why people generally perform better on mentally taxing tasks if they are paid to succeed, given the immediate prospect of a reward. The prediction machine, even one that subscribes to the limited view, is more willing to risk exhaustion by devoting more resources to its activities. The brain's internal bookkeeping can also help as us understand why the mere taste of sugary drinks immediately improves performance, even before the glucose can actually reach our neurons. Some studies have even found that rinsing the mouth with sugar water before spitting it out can improve performance. Once the glucose receptors in the mouth have signaled that more fuel is coming, the accountant knows that the brain can afford to spend its existing energy more generously. Consistent with this idea, Job has shown that ingesting sweet, sugary drinks tends to offer more relief to people with a limited mindset, who are more likely to feel that they are on the verge of exhaustion and to be parceling out their existing reserves conservatively than to people with a non-limited mindset. Many other substances used to aid concentration may work through a belief rather than any direct effect of the chemicals themselves. When studied in controlled trials that properly account for the influence of expectation, the brain-boosting effects of caffeine were found primarily to rise from our beliefs about its benefits. Indeed, one study found that the mere smell of coffee is enough to lead to immediate improvements in performance, thanks to its associations with mental acuity. Even so-called smart drugs, such as amphetamine salts used by ambitious students and workers to enhance their concentration and focus, may work through altered expectations of our own capability independently of any biochemical effects. A will of steel. Just how much willpower can any person use before they run out of gas? The astonishingly prolific American writer Danielle Steel may offer some surprising clues. 179 books into her career, Steel revealed that she had achieved her success by working 20-hour days, beginning at 8:30 in the morning while resisting almost all distractions. If she faces a creative challenge, she relies on her boundless energy to keep on slogging through it. The more you shy away from the material, the worse it gets. You're better off pushing through, she advised. Steel said that she fails to understand how she could become exhausted by her work, an attitude that certainly sounds very close to the non-limited beliefs about the mind that Job has studied. She even has a sign in her office that reads, "There are no miracles, there is only discipline." The interview, published in 2019, soon went viral, with many newspapers and other outlets describing Steele's powers of focus and self-control as superhuman. As The Guardian pointed out at the time, it's one thing to be driven. It's quite another to have to summon up and sustain the willpower to do the driving. This response is not surprising, considering that most people believe even a short period of uninterrupted mental exertion is tiring. Job's research suggests that many more of us could attain higher levels of productivity if we adopted the right mindset. But Steele's work ethic might ring some warning bells too. One potential criticism of Job's research is that non-limited beliefs about the brain could lead us to push ourselves too hard, without permitting any pleasure in life. Fortunately, extreme workaholism does not seem to be a common problem for people with the non-limited beliefs, at least according to Job's studies. Indeed, the research shows that they tend to be happier and healthier than those who expect mental effort to be depleting, which is hardly what you'd expect of the typical workaholic. One reason is that they use their mental resources to plan their work effectively without wasting time on distractions. They are more efficient at reaching their goals, which is a strong predictor of well-being, Job told me. And once they have left work, they will feel more energized to take care of the rest of their life. People with the limited beliefs, in contrast, tend to feel so depleted that they fail to organize their work and feel more burdened as a result. They then return home so exhausted that they find little energy to enjoy their time off either. Surprisingly, people with the limited beliefs even suffer from worse sleep, since they don't have, or don't think they have, the self-control to get an early night when they need it, and instead put off bedtime, a phenomenon called sleep procrastination that will compound their exhaustion. The truth is that a boost to your willpower should help you to achieve whatever work-life balance is best for you, whether that's an all-consuming schedule like Steele's or a few hours of concentrated work, followed by plenty of time for play. Your mental resources will be there for you to use whenever you need them. If you have a limited mindset and want to change your own expectations, simply learning about your vast mental reserves can have immediate benefits on your focus and self-control. In one experiment, participants read an article about the biology of unlimited willpower, which described the typically abundant reserves of glucose in our brain and the body's capacity to release more when we need it. The message became a self-fulfilling prophecy. The concentration and focus on cognitive tests actually increased with the greater workload once they had been told about the brain's available resources. Once again, merely taking a few minutes to reappraise your expectations can change something that was thought to be psychologically intractable. As you process these new ideas, you might benefit from thinking a little about the times you yourself have felt energized after a demanding task in the past. Even if you have the limited beliefs about the brain, there will have been times when you felt you were in the zone on a complex task, so fully absorbed by what you were doing that you didn't feel time passing. You might have been engrossed in a novel or playing a complex computer game late into the night, for example. Those are both examples of your focus increasing with effort, even though you may not have recognized that fact at the time, since you were enjoying yourself so much. Or consider a moment when you found that exercising self-control left you feeling stronger. Simply remembering that kind of event can open your mind to the idea that your mental reserves of focus and self-control are much deeper than you assume. Once you have started to recognize this, you can test your limits with small challenges. They should reflect a realistic goal that you already feel highly motivated to achieve. In the classic ego depletion tests, people tend to find voluntary activities picked with a sense of autonomy to be less fatiguing than those imposed by others. It could be as simple as avoiding the temptations of social media for a whole day to test whether you can work more productively than you had previously imagined. If you tend to find your evenings are wasted with unfulfilling activities, you might try practicing a hobby rather than watching TV for one evening, to see if this leaves you more energized than you had thought. Given Job and Savani's research in India, you might even try the traditional yogic exercise of Tritaka, in which you focus on a single point for a few moments to cleanse the mind and sharpen your concentration. Whatever you do, don't start out by seeking to emulate Daniel Steele's prolonged displays of willpower. If you attempt too much too quickly, you may fail, and that will only cement the belief that your mental reserves are limited and easily depleted. As we also saw with research on stress, Chapter 7, you should edge out of your comfort zone and then question how you felt throughout. With time, you may find that you are more capable of exercising self-control and concentration when you need it. Parents and teachers might want to take particular note of these findings. In education, self-control and concentration are often as important for a child's academic success as natural intelligence, and Jobs' research suggests new ways that these qualities may be cultivated at a young age. The psychologist Kyla Hamovitz and colleagues recently visited a school in the San Francisco Bay Area and read the 4 and 5-year-old children a simple story about a little girl who had to exercise patience and determination while waiting to open a present, buying an ice cream, or solving a difficult puzzle at school. At each challenge, the character felt stronger and stronger the longer she waited, or the more she persevered. A message that was designed to prime the children with the non-limited view of willpower. After hearing the story, the children were given a classic test of self-regulation. The option of either having a small treat as soon as they felt like it or waiting for a full 13 minutes to have a bigger treat instead, which is pretty much the hardest test of self-control you can give a preschooler. Overall, 74% of the children who had heard the inspiring story managed to resist temptation, compared to just 45% of a control group who heard a different tale. Clearly, a single storybook is not going to change a life, but with regular exposure to similar messages, children should be better equipped to exercise their willpower in all kinds of tasks, providing them with an inbuilt resilience during times of pressure and exertion in later life. In the next chapter, we will examine more strategies through which teachers and business leaders can use expectation effects to enhance the potential of whole groups of students and employees. But to end our exploration of willpower, let's look at a final means of boosting focus and self-control through prayer or ritual. Secular superstition. Look into the biography of any elite performer in sport or entertainment, and there is a good chance they'll have some kind of superstition or ritual. Most basketball players, for example, develop a routine of set movements that they perform, such as dribbling, pausing, bouncing the ball, and spinning it a certain number of times, or even kissing it before taking their foul shot. Serena Williams listens to the same song, Flashdance, What a Feeling, by Irene Cara before she goes on court, and bounces the ball exactly 5 times before her first serve. Rafael Nadal always takes a cold shower before each match and performs a characteristic series of gestures as he waits for his opponents. In the arts, Beyoncé prays and performs a fixed set of stretching exercises before a performance, while the ballerina Suzanne Farrell, who is considered to have been one of the U.S.'s greatest dancers, always pinned a small toy mouse inside her leotard. Superstitions and rituals are also prevalent among writers. Dr. Seuss would wear a lucky hat when he felt that he was blocked. And composers, Beethoven relied on coffee to fuel his creativity, and he religiously counted out exactly 60 beans for each cup. Before I learned about the power of expectation effects, I would have believed these superstitions to be a kind of emotional crutch without any direct benefits to performance. And I would have been mistaken. One study of free throws in a basketball found that players were around 12.4 percentage points more accurate when they followed their personal routines before the shot than when they deviated from the sequence. Overall, the total success rate was 83.8% with the exact routine, compared to 71.4% without. Superstitions and rituals can also boost perseverance and performance across a whole range of cognitive tasks, and the advantages are often considerable. In a test of verbal dexterity, for instance, the presence of a lucky charm brought a 50% improvement. Simply hearing a superstitious phrase, such as break a leg, can even bring about a small advantage, according to one study. Why would rituals enhance people's skills across so many different domains in this way? One obvious explanation is that superstitious beliefs and rituals help to quell anxiety by creating the sense that you have more control over the situation. That is most certainly a factor. Equally importantly, however, they may lead us to have more faith in our mental reserves and our capacity to maintain concentration and self-discipline. As a result, we can persevere even when others would begin to feel exhausted and start to give up. And with the increased mental focus, we can avoid any distractions that might limit our performance. One study that directly tested the effects of superstitious beliefs on willpower found that people who spend time in spiritual contemplation sustain greater focus on tests of concentration than those who do not. If you are beginning to feel your discipline weakening, the belief in a helping hand from some supernatural power can replenish your reserves. Given these results, some researchers have speculated that the boost for willpower could have been a primary reason that many cultures evolved religious rituals and beliefs in the first place. In our evolutionary past, the increased self-control might have helped them to rein in their worst impulses, such as aggression or stealing from neighbors, and forego immediate pleasure, such as gorging on restricted food supplies, for the future good of the group. Fortunately for atheists, you can still benefit from certain rituals without any need for a higher power. As we saw with open-label studies in Chapter 2, placebo treatments can be effective even when participants are fully aware that they are taking the sham drug. Apparently, because the routine itself appears to trigger the expectation that they will get better. Superstitions and rituals seem to be no different, with strong evidence that they can provide a boost even if people are fully aware that there is no rational reason why they should work. In one beautifully bizarre experiment, Alison Wood Brooks at Harvard University and colleges invited participants to perform a karaoke rendition of Don't Stop Believin' by Journey. To ensure that they made their best possible effort, the subjects were told they would be judged for the accuracy of their performance, as rated by the karaoke software, and they would be given a bonus of up to $5 for a pitch-perfect rendition of the song. Before the performance began, around half of the participants were given the following instructions. Please do the following ritual. Draw a picture of how you are feeling right now. Sprinkle salt on your drawing. Count to 5 out loud. Crinkle up your paper and throw your paper in the trash. The mere act of performing the ritual, which could have offered no direct benefit to their singing, boosted the participants' singing scores by 13 points out of 100, compared to control participants who had simply waited quietly until they were asked to perform. Follow-up experiments revealed similar improvements on a difficult math test, and the exact framing of the preparatory routine mattered. If it was called a ritual, the participants saw the benefits, but not if they were asked to perform a few random behaviors. The connotations of the world clearly mattered in boosting their ability to remain focused under pressure, in just the same way that the word placebo brings its own medical benefits. The adoption of secular rituals can also improve our resolve in some classical tests of willpower that often leave us feeling depleted, including our capacity to resist the temptation of a tasty treat. Participants in one experiment were asked to perform some ritual gestures, sitting upright, closing their eyes, bowing their head, and counting to 10 before they ate, while a control group performed a set of random movements. They were then given a choice between a Snickers bar and a lower-calorie fruit and cereal bar. On a subsequent questionnaire, the participants who had performed the ritual were more likely to report greater feelings of discipline, giving higher ratings to statements such as, "I felt mentally strong when making this decision," and "I felt sharp and focused when making this decision." And this was reflected in the food they chose to eat. Around 64% of those in the ritual condition chose the healthier option over the chocolate bar, compared with 48% performing random movements without the sense of ritual. And given these results, we might all consider adopting a few rituals that help to engender a sense of control and focus. The aim should be to choose something personally meaningful and straightforward, like the dieters performing the ritual movements. You want something that easily evokes feelings of inner strength. If it is overly complex, the routine may itself be difficult to maintain in the hour of need, a burden that could potentially add to your anxiety and lower your performance. It could be as simple as performing exactly the same sequence of stretches each morning before work, or having a particular voice warm-up that you repeat before an important presentation, or saying a special mantra before your discipline is about to be tested. I personally try to build a ritual around my morning coffee before I start writing, counting out the number of beans like Beethoven to imbue it with a sense of significance and to prime my mind for focused concentration. If you have some favorite clothes or perfume, turn that into a lucky charm that you use when you know you're going to have to act under pressure. Whether you are a professional athlete, singer, or public speaker, or you simply want to have the self-control to avoid procrastination and stop wasting time, the only thing holding you back may be your expectations of your own willpower and a little manufactured luck. And a sense of control could be all you need to set you on the path to success. How to think about willpower. A sense of autonomy, the feeling that you have control over your activities, can reduce the sense of ego depletion even if you have the limited mindset. Where possible, make an effort to establish your own routines rather than following others' orders, and regularly remind yourself of their purpose and meaning to you personally. Try to recognize instances when you personally find mental effort to be invigorating. What difficult tasks do you enjoy because of their difficulty? Reminding yourself of these activities will help build up your beliefs in your potential. When you find an activity to be draining, consider whether it is objectively more difficult than the things you find energizing, or whether it is just a preconception. Do other people find it energizing, for instance, and is it objectively more difficult than the other activities that do not feel so depleting? By questioning these assumptions, you may begin to see that you are capable of much more than you thought. Establish your own rituals and secular superstitions that will help you to establish a feeling of control in times of high pressure. It could be a lucky charm that has positive associations, or a set of reassuring gestures. Anything that feels personally significant and brings the promise of success.